All right, class. First off, as always, good day. I'm glad you're here. Today, we are going to be going over how Russia was like in the 19th century, and then we're going to be looking at some leaders around the world, specifically in England and France. Okay, so let's go ahead and look up your objectives. So, the objective today, we're going to analyze the effort Czar Alexander II gave to make Russia better. You're going to see what this guy honestly tried to do, some good things for the people, and how it backfired. I mean, really, kind of a sad story. Then we're going to examine how Emperor Napoleon III tries to make France better, specifically one town in particular. And then lastly, we're going to create an argument on whether a country reflects their leader's attitude. So if a leader is confident and, Mr. Chingon, things like that, do the people kind of like, does that attitude kind of rub off on the people? That's the kind of argument we're going to make at the very end. Okay? So let's go ahead and go to your warm-up picture. All right. So here's your warm-up picture. If by chance you have the other packet, because you were of the Monday, Wednesday class, Tuesday, Thursday class, you do not have this picture. Actually, I'm sorry, you do have this picture, but your work will not be on this video. Your work is going to be on the packet with the pages on it from a book. Okay, so this does not really apply to you on this one, but the warm-up picture does. Okay, so the first question asks you basically what's happening here. What's going on. Okay, now the second question asks you, why do you think England, which if you look, if you see the octopus, you go to the left, you'll see France, right? He kind of look like he's holding a telescope or a cannon or something like that. If you look above him, that's in the blue, that is England, right? If you go down in the green in the corner, that's Spain. And if you move a little to the right from Spain, you'll see Italy. Now, the second question asks you, if you look at them the way they are, they're just kicking back. A couple of them are not even paying attention. Why do you think that is? Right? If you look at the other countries like Germany, Turkey, Austria, Hungary, they're doing something, but England, France, Spain, Italy, they're not. So why do you think they aren't doing anything? Okay, so think about it. Write your response, because we're moving on in 3, 2, 1. Now, if you are in the Tuesday, Thursday class, and your warm-up looks like this, then this is the one for you, okay? The other one was for the book work, okay? This one is for you guys on this same topic, okay? So again, if you have the packet that has like all the pages from the textbook, that last warm-up, that was for you guys. If you're on the Monday, Wednesday class, you don't have to watch this. You can just move on. Okay, you can skip ahead a little. Okay, but for the Tuesday, Thursday, this is your guys' warm-up for these notes. Okay, the first question asks you, ultimately, what's going to happen to this guy? Okay, so if you look in the background, it's kind of like there's a mountain, and if you look below, it's like dark. So ultimately, what's going to happen? The second question asks you, look at the guy. He's sliding in his sled towards the bottom. And he's just arms folded, just not, if it was me, I'd be screaming. I'd be trying to grab something, This guy's just arms folded like, So what do you think why do you think that is? Why do you think he's just nonchalantly just, kind of have that, whatever mentality. Why do you think that is? What could be some possible reasons why he's like that? Okay, so pause the video. Okay, write your response because we're moving on in 3, 2, 1. All right, so now, regardless of which warm-up picture you had, this is your notes, okay? Now, at the beginning of the 19th century, Russia was mainly a rural country. Rural means like farms, agriculture, things like that. Not many big cities, not many factories, no like really nice paved roads. It's very agricultural. It's very just, like Middle Ages type of thing. Okay. And they had an autocratic government, which means, again, someone who controls everything. Now, their leader, their czar, okay, you have to remember, this is something people truly believed in. They believed that he got his power from the divine right theory, which is, some of you guys may remember this, some of you guys may not. Divine right means that it came from God. That God basically parted the clouds, shined the light down, and said, "This is your ruler." Now, here's the thing. Back then, a lot of people were very, very religious. All right, more than people are now. Okay, and very religious people, they don't think God makes a mistake because it's God. God doesn't make mistakes. So, if God chose this person to be the ruler, then God doesn't make mistakes, then this person, they can't make mistakes, right? Because if they make a mistake, then that means that God made a mistake. And that can't happen, right? So these guys, these rulers, they basically were brought up with the mentality of, you're always right. No matter what you do, you're always right. And they had unlimited power. They could do what they want. But still, talks of revolution started popping up. People in Russia were like, well, you know what? The French have had a revolution. The Americans, the Germans, the Austrian, and the Austrian-Hungary, they've had revolutions. Why can't we? So people started talking about this kind of stuff, about changing the government, changing who gets power, things like that. And the Tsar, the king, he used different things to bring down the talk of revolution. He used soldiers. He used secret police, so people would rat out other people for money, or people were hired to listen to other people around town and basically throw the rat on them. Repression, someone tries to do something, hey, don't worry, this town wants to do revolution, will hurt them in one way or another. And censorship, someone starts giving a speech, somebody comes up, takes that person away. Watch what people write in newspapers and things like that. So that kind of stuff is what the Tsar used to suppress revolution talk. Now, at the very, very beginning of this unit, I talked about the Crimean War. And I told you guys how Russia basically were Mr. Chingon, Mr. Big and Bad. And then they went against the Ottoman Empire. It looked like they were going to win. And then that's when France and Britain joined in, and they basically pushed the Russians back. Now, Russia, again, talking all that smack, saying all this stuff. When they got beat in the Crimean War, they're basically like that dog. If you ever had a dog and they did something bad, and you're like, oh, you start yelling at them, and they're kind of like their heads down and their tails between their legs because they know they did something bad. Same thing with Russia. Except it's not like, oh, we did something bad. It was more like, oh, man, we got our butts kicked. They knew it, and they tried to hide in the shadows a little bit. So then comes this guy. This is Czar Alexander II. Now, he, like many of the Russian people, realized, man, we are so far behind everyone in the world. You know, in every sense of the definition, countries like Britain, France, even America are having big cities. They're having factories. They're having industry. And he's like, Russia, we don't have that. We have nothing like that. And he basically looked at all their problems and boiled it all down. And the one main thing that it came down to was serfdom. The whole idea of the king, nobles, and peasants. That system, he's like, that's what's really hurting our country. Because if the nobles are going to get rich, the king, myself, we are going to be, I'm going to be rich. But the poor people, the people who make up the whole country, they're the ones who are suffering. They're the ones who actually can turn a country around. Because if they got a good job, they got money, they're going to buy things, that's going to get the economy going. They're going to make their lives better. And life for everyone, excuse me, is going to be so much better. It's a simian circle. When one gets better, then the other one gets better, and then it comes all the way around. All the way around. So what he did on March 3rd, 1861, is he issued emancipation to all serfs. Emancipation is a fancy word for basically freedom. He's like, hey, all you serfs, all you peasants, you're now free. Okay? Now, how I explained it in class was like this. There's slaves, like how African Americans were treated in America, whipped and things like that. They're slaves. And peasant serfdom is like right there, right above. Okay? The reason that is because they are free, unlike the African American slaves in the United States. These guys, these peasants, they're free, but they basically get no money. The system is made so that they can't progress. They can't get educated. They can't save up money to buy their own stuff, buy their own land, things like that. So he's like, let's get rid of that. Now with that, they got some perks. One, now peasants could own land. Second thing, which is something you guys probably don't, you guys probably take for granted, really, is that they could now legally marry anyone. Now, I'm sure you're thinking, well, couldn't they do that before? No. They had arranged marriages. Basically, it's like, hey, my son and your daughter should get married. And they would give a dowry, saying, hey, if your son married my daughter, I'll give you $1,000, $10,000, whatever it may be. And it usually the dowry was usually dependent on the attributes of the woman, So like if she was beautiful, but she did nothing, she was like lazy, then the dowry was, kind of low. But if she's like ugly, but I mean, she could do everything, cook, clean, she could have kids, she, there's nothing, she would do everything. Then her dowry, actually, no, I take that back. Yeah, no, then the dowry would be high. No, my bad. I'm so sorry. Hold on one second. All right, I messed up my example. So if, let's say she's, she can do everything, right? Cook, clean, do all this stuff. And let's say she had a pretty face, it's like, well, she would be wanted, right? So the family wouldn't have to pay really anybody that much money to take her because everybody would want her. But if a girl was, let's say, not that pretty, lazy, didn't know how to cook, didn't know how to clean, then the dowry would be really high because that family's trying to get rid of her. They're trying to basically get someone to marry her, so that money and the money they would set would be pretty high. Okay, so that whole system of dowry and the arranged marriages went away. Now, To make things a little bit nicer, Tsar Alexander II basically told the people, hey, you peasants, I'm going to give you guys land, right? I'm going to give you land so then you can farm it, right? Because that's what you guys know. You guys don't have an education, things like that. So I'm going to give you some land. You guys can then grow your crops. You can keep it and eat it. You can sell it. It's up to you. And then you can progress because now you have property, and then you can grow crops, and then you can go, make money and things like that, and maybe open a store, and or whatever. So he was like, we're gonna help you guys out, which is an awesome thing. Hey, that's nice. But as you're gonna see in a little bit, it kind of backfires. So here's my first question to you. What are your thoughts about arranged marriages? Do you think it's a good idea, bad idea? Okay. Now, again, you don't know who this person is usually until like the day of the wedding. Maybe if you're lucky, a couple days before, you get to see them, meet them. The other part of it is, how would you feel if you found out that your parents made a legal agreement for you to marry somebody? And the thing is, let's say you're like, well, I don't want to marry them. I'm not going to marry them. Then because you guys have an illegal agreement, your family could lose everything. If you guys live in a house, you're gonna lose your house. You guys have cars, you're gonna lose your car. Even your stuff, clothes and all this stuff, any possessions you have will be taken. So would you go through with it? Yes or no? And why? Don't forget the why. Okay? So think about it. Write your response because we're moving on in 3, 2, 1. All right. So here's the problem. Tsar Nicholas II basically went to the nobles because they had the land. And he's asking them, hey, I heard you have like 1 million acres of land. Let me buy like half a million acres. Excuse me. And he would. And then this other noble, how much? Yeah, I need this much land. How much you got? Okay, I'll buy this much. And you, how much you got? Okay, I'll buy this much. The problem was the nobles didn't sell him the best land. They actually sold him the worst land. Yeah, they kept the good land for themselves and they sold the bad land. So a lot of these nobles, when they got this land from the Tsar, they're like, oh, cool. Now we can, grow crops, things like that. So a lot of these peasants took out money, bought things on credit. They bought tools, things like that, seeds, whatever they needed to farm. And because that land was bad, they couldn't grow things. Either the ground was too rocky, there was like a fungus, bacteria in the soil that just ate up the dirt. The area was full of, had like a little window to actually plant, or else it's going to be snowing, things like that. So yeah, it was pretty bad. And because of that, because they couldn't grow crops, because they couldn't make money, these peasants now went into more debt because now they couldn't pay back for the tools they used, the seeds they bought, and things like that. So things got worse for the
peasants.
Alexander II's like, I'm trying to do some stuff for y'all. I'm trying to make your life better. And a lot of them didn't appreciate it, and a lot of them were just like, well, things are worse now, thanks to you. So what happened was, there's two groups that really popped up during this time: reformers and conservatives. Reformers basically wanted more changes from him and quicker. They wanted quicker changes, not talking, no more delaying, just, hey, we need change now. Actually, we need it yesterday, so you need to get that done now. And then you had this group called the conservatives, who basically saw the king, the Tsar, as a person who's trying to destroy Russia from the inside out. They're like, he's trying to destroy our way of life, our government, our country. He's trying to destroy it. So they saw him as a villain. Now, a group of radicals ended up assassinating Alexander II. Right? They killed him. So then his son, which is right there, Alexander III, takes over. And, it's most sons, when they hear that their father was assassinated, was murdered, that they'd be like, you know what, we're going to find out who did this, things like that. I'm going to, put a lot of effort into finding that information. Alexander III was like, he did. What do you want me to do? He did. And when he became the new czar, his people, his advisors came in and they're like, okay, sir, what would you like to do first? He's like, everything my father did, let's undo it. Yeah, all the stuff my father did, let's undo that, because that was crap. The only really true, wow thing that Alexander III did for Russia is, if you look at the map on the bottom, he basically created this Trans-Siberian Railway, which goes from one side of Russia all the way through to the other side. Now, I don't know if you guys know this or not, but Russia is massive. Russia is huge, a huge, huge country. And to go from one side of Russia to the other, I mean, it's going to take you months, to go on horse or on a wagon, things like that, going, side to side, up and down mountains and things like that, going through snow, blizzards, things like that. So it was pretty tough, to get from one side to the other. But with this train system, hey, you can go from one side to the other, and it took nowhere near as long as going on a horse from one side to the other. Nowhere near. If I remember right, still to this day, it is used. That line is still used by the train system. I think they've added more. I think they really, really added more. But from my understanding, that is still the same track as it was back in his time, in the 80s. All right, so here's your second question. Czar Alexander II, again, bought land from the nobles, gave it to the peasants to farm, right, and then try to progress. That didn't work. Okay, my question to you is this: if you were in his shoes, what would you have done to try to help the poor peasant people? We already know giving them land, that plan didn't work. So what would you say? What do you think would work? And tell me why. Why would that one work better than his thing? What he did. All right, so try to think of something else, another solution of how he could have helped out the peasants, and explain why is that one better than the one that your plan is better than the one that he had. Okay, so think about it, write your response, because we're moving on in 3, 2, 1. All right, now this striking young lady right here, you see to the side, that is Queen Victoria, which at one point she had the longest reign in English history. She is now has the second longest reign, thanks to Elizabeth II. That's the queen right now. Now, your next question on your paper, it should say something like, how long was she queen? Guys, I don't want the dates. I already know the dates. They're right there. I can see them. I want you to do the math, to actually do the math and, write it out. How many years was she queen? Okay. Now, the thing is, with Queen Victoria, she knew, hey, I'm going to be queen. She was already told, you are going to be queen of England, things like that. And she was taught, and really, it was the attitude was installed in her that, hey, you should be proud of your country. You should be proud of it. And that's how she was. She had this sense of national pride. So if any of you guys have ever been in sports, you know there's always that one player or maybe even a coach who knows how to hype you up, get you going, make you feel like, yeah, we are the baddest, we are the greatest, things like that, to boost out the morale. That was Queen Victoria. She made people in England feel like, hey, I am proud to be from this country. I am proud that she is my queen. We are the greatest. We are the best country in the world. She knew how to do that. So her sense of duty and moral respectability reflected in her time, her era, which became known as the Victorian Age. Okay, so she was around for quite a while. People picked up that that attributes, that energy that she had, things like that. Now, during her time, she saw a lot of changes. Okay, she witnessed political reform. She saw a time when people still had kings, and then when time she died, right before she died, they had changed into a democracy. They have changed to a republic form instead of king and queens, things like that. The railway system, trains were in its infancy when she first took over. Trains were barely getting going. And then by the time she died, trains were bigger, faster, and they were everywhere. The train tracks were going everywhere. The invention of the telephone. When she first took over, if you wanted to talk to someone and hear their voice, you had to be right near them. If they were 2 miles away, you couldn't hear them. But with a telephone, hey, I can hear you. The only thing that was around that time that you can get long distance communication was the Morse code thing, that type of thing. That was the only thing they had back then that could do long distance. But now with the telephone, bam, you can actually hear someone on the other side miles away. The demise of rural life. When she took over, there was still a lot of farm life and things like that. And then by the time her era ended, it was more factories, more industry instead of farming. There's a lot more cities that popped up in England during her time. Back then there was only maybe 2, 3, maybe 4 max. And then boom, more cities getting bigger. Buildings were getting taller, things like that. So she saw rapid change. And lastly, one of the world's most scariest killers was around that time. Jack the Ripper. No one knows who he is, but yeah, he killed women in London in the middle of the dark, at nighttime, and he would take body parts and things like that. Like I told the class, he would do that in the middle of the night with precision. It's not like he hacked away. We know nowadays more than likely this person is a doctor or something like that, or had took some medical classes, because to cut someone's heart out perfectly in the nighttime, that means you have to have some skill. But back then they didn't think anything like that. They didn't think a smart, educated person could kill anyone. They didn't think a noble person with money, they could never do things like that. That's killing is only for poor people who are from a different religion, like Jewish or Catholic. They were seen as oh, you people might do that kind of things. It can't possibly be a rich or smart person. Nowadays, we're no different. All right, so some of this information might look the same from the last video, which it is, so we're not going to go through it. But basically what happened is, in 1848, France was like, we want to bring back the king. Well, the last king, which was Napoleon I, he's no longer around. So they're like, well, what about his grandson? And his grandson's name was Louis Napoleon, which is the picture of him right there. And they basically had a vote in France. and they voted 97% to 3. 97% of the people of France said, we want him as our emperor. It was an overwhelming number. So December 2nd, 1852, he becomes known as Napoleon III, Emperor of France. So what did Napoleon III do? He created subsidies in around France, and he decided, we should make things better. So railroads, harbors, roads, canals, all these things were made better. Railroads, tracks were laid out better. Harbors where boats come in, bigger, nicer, better. Roads, no longer, sometimes a carriage would hit a rock that was right in the middle of the road. Get rid of that stuff, dig out all those rocks, made the road nice and paved and smooth. Canals where water goes through the towns, make them bigger, make them deeper so that boats can go through, people can swim, things like that. But his main focus was actually Paris. The city of Paris needed a pick-me-up. It needed a redo, because when they made it, they didn't think about carriages. They didn't think about, transportation going through. It was just the streets were very narrow, dirty, nasty looking. And he's like, no. Man, people are coming to this place. And when people think of France, they think of Paris. So we need to make this better. So he basically destroyed some buildings, made the streets bigger. Right? Streets got bigger, wider. They put in a public square. Before, people used to get their, toilet stuff and toss it out the window. He's like, no. We need a better system to get rid of your waste. So they created an underground sewage system. So now people didn't have to smell all the pee and, caca and all that stuff. They didn't have to smell it on the street. Now it was being flushed underneath them. So the streets looked nice, and all that refuge went out to the water, to the ocean, and some of that. And on top of that, a new public water system was made, so people can actually drink water. People can go to a fountain and see the springs come up and things like that. And on top of that, they put gaslight. So now people can walk through Paris at nighttime, as opposed to getting a candle and putting it up and, things like that. Now they can control the lights in the city. So it was all pretty interesting stuff. And it made Paris like Tinseltown in that time. So here's your next question. Why do you think Napoleon III rebuilt Paris? What are some possible reasons he would say this town needs a makeover? Why? Look at what Paris is today and think about that. Okay? And if you don't know, you should really watch some movies when they talk about Paris. That should give you a hint, All right? So pause the video, write your responses, because we're moving on in 3, 2, 1. All right, so here's your exit ticket question. Why do you think Alexander III undid all the stuff his father did? Do you think Russia will be better because of this, or do you think they'll get worse? And tell me why you believe that. Okay, so that's one. The other question is, do you think a country reflects their leader's attitude all the time, or do you think it's only under certain circumstances? So like think of like presidents, kings, queens, things like that. Does the country does that person, that leader, does their attitude, their demeanor, does that reflect, and does do people absorb that? Or do you think that was just like only once in a while that's probably happened? What do you think? Do you think it happens all the time, or like just once in a while? All right. So once you've written your response, that's the end for this lesson. Okay. Hopefully you guys learned something new. Hopefully you enjoyed this lesson. Okay. You guys, I will see you later. You take care. You be safe, all right?